Well, as I sit here with Dr. Bernice King, Ambassador Shabazz, the royal family of the civil rights movement, your parents were the role models for a generation of black men and black women. My mom and my dad was emulating your dad and your mom in terms of how I was raised. And I want to thank you for that.
First, let me say thank you for acknowledging our parents. They were young people, young individuals, and no new day was promised for them, as we know how they concluded. They were raising families and trying to keep us away from fear, but preserving the dignity and the purpose for life.
I believe my father was a prophet to the world. I think he left us with some important teachings that are necessary and essential, and we're going to be forced at some point to really start looking at embracing.
Our fathers are not accident in the way they led, the way they journeyed, the way they evolved, the way they understood, the way they served, the way they gave, the way they gifted. They believed it. But at the end of the day, you actually know that whisper that affirms that we are indeed part of the human family.
History doesn't really tell us how connected your families were.
They disconnect our families in the telling of history.
They only met on one occasion.
Well, no, but they communicated. So this is the thing: it's always documented they met on one occasion, as if there was as if it was a hit and a run.
Right.
People don't realize that my father went down to Washington and he said, "Make sure Martin knows I'm here."
Yeah.
Because to have walked out would have been polarizing.
Yeah.
So the intentionality, right? Very specific, because this is not about me.
Yeah,
this is about how that message gets, if it's going to work.
Yes.
There was a relationship that sometimes even their own respective factions may not have wanted to blur, because we do that too. But they understood one another, and they were both at places where the plural mattered. That's the stuff people don't know about.
Yeah.
And then when I met this little one,
You still
She has years on me. So she knows things I don't know.
Yeah,
I used to tell people all the time, when I would do interviews with my siblings, I kind of just sat there because, I was the 5-year-old on my mom's lap. I missed most of those years where a lot of stuff was happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with your moms, you have two strong women who have lost their soulmates. How was it living in a household with strong mothers like that?
But it takes someone to carry your legacy forward, and she was that person. And so when we remember and think about Dr. King, his greatness and all that he did, and even the access we have to certain things about him and the way in which we remember him, she's really the architect of all of that and doesn't get enough credit. We forget that. It's like this wonderful man. And the reason he could keep going.
Yeah.
That's
They held them up. They held their husbands up, and their husbands knew it.
I'm sure there's got to be some private moments that you just want to yourself. How do you balance this moment with yourself, family, and the world at large?
Coming upon this 50th anniversary has been hard for me.
Yeah.
I've cried. Things are coming up more for me emotionally that perhaps were buried prior to. I'll be frank, there are times when I'm like, I don't like sharing this. I feel sometimes that, wow, everybody, quote unquote, gets to co-opt the moment.
Yeah.
And where am I in all of this? Because I was that little girl. And I can't remember anything about what happened on April 4th. Nothing.
Yeah.
I can remember April 9th, the funeral, because it was hot. There were a lot of lights. And I remember his voice being played. And because my mother had told me prior to, in preparing me, that when you see your father, he's not going to be able to speak to you anymore. He's gone to live with God. So when they played the voice, you told me he wouldn't be able to speak. So this little girl knew her father's voice. I'm looking for him. I'm confused, like he can't, but he's speaking. Where is he? And so You know, for me, it's a very emotional time period. Every year we go through it.
Yeah.
But for some reason, because I'm having to be more focused this 50th year, it's now forced me to face that time period.
If there's any families that should be hateful, both of your families deserve that. But still, there's a unity, there's a coming together, there's a wanting to extend. And I ask you, why?
I know for me, when you get to experience what goes around, comes around. I've also lived long enough to see the good come around. I've lived long enough to see patience come around, the value or the result of patience, enabling people to grow at their own pace with understanding, and being glad that I didn't say something in advance to have stained that trajectory.
Yeah.
I went through a season where I hated.
Yeah.
I hated white people and white males in particular. Yeah. And I had to deal with that for a long time. And I'm going to tell you what's really strange. Something as simple as a conversation that leads to a hug started changing that pathway.
Yeah.
I was on a television show with the evangelical James Robeson. And he was interviewing me about my father and growing up, you know, without him. And in the middle of the show, he just said, "Can I give you a hug?" I said, "Sure." And when he hugged me, it was one of the most genuine hugs I had ever received in my life. And it just started changing me from the inside out. And then little things would start happening where it was like God was sending these little messages to me. So I'd be on a plane and getting ready to put on my coat, and a white gentleman says, "Can I help you?" And it just, little things just like that. And I started seeing them in a different light.
Right.
And so it started easing that emotion, but it took some time. And I now realize the value of and the power of unconditional love and the importance of it to humanity.
How can athletes join your movement and use their platforms in terms of activism today?
The way in which it's being done today is less of a threat than if there was a true alliance in joining. And so if that's something they really are heart and soul committed to, they have to be prepared to pay the price.
How would your father like to see this day remembered?
It's more than a day. It's the journey, it's the process, it's the commitment. We do this every year, and I always say, how can we just push people further? I'm going to learn how to love people that hate me. I'm going to learn how to speak truth in a way that doesn't denigrate. I'm going to learn how to hear and understand. I think this day ought to always represent love for humanity.
Certainly powerful and impactful, but Isiah, what did we not see in that interview that's stayed with you after you were done talking to them?
Well, as Dr. Bernice King said, you know, she's going to learn how to continue to love people that hate. And the thing that really stood out for me was during that period of time, just how unpopular that message was that Dr. King and Malcolm X was speaking about love, unity, coming together, us as a people. And when they talk about race, they talk about the human race as one. They don't speak of it as different factions. And that was the most powerful thing for me, is just sitting and listening to, you know, them speak about their moms, the struggles that their moms had in terms of raising them, their families being shattered, torn apart so publicly and so violently. But, you know, weeks and months later, mom taking their hands and walking them to school, you know, making sure that everybody's okay and everybody's doing all right. The moms were just unbelievably strong and had so much amazing courage during their period of time. And that's the thing that really sticks out to me that wasn't being told and wasn't talked about. And when you see Ambassador Shabazz and Dr. King still sane of mind, able to sit here and talk about love, unity, togetherness, it's a powerful message that's really needed today. You know, we hear so much about hate, but love does conquer hate. And at the end of the day, what we can do is stand together and continue to extend our love to the world and to the human race.
Brent, there was something that Ambassador Shabazz said that really stood out to you as well, right?
Well, she's talking about the rewards of patience, and I think about the way that, you know, we live our lives and get caught up in things, and sometimes our kids the same way, where we just don't stop and think about if we see things through. One of the things I read this morning in the Washington Post, Russell Rickford wrote a great article about how Dr. King was not celebrating American exceptionalism at the time that he was starting this movement and changing our nation. He was challenging it. And the words of Dr. King then, to think it's 50 years later, that challenge is still something that's in front of us. And to Isaiah's point, after sitting down with those lovely women and hearing that message, the one thing about all these interpretations of Dr. King 50 years later, and whether or not it, you know, pacifism of Dr. King and the freedom at all costs of Malcolm X, and, you know, how at one point they basically converged and had the same message. I don't know how it is that we can't find this interpretation about simply loving one another. And the relevancy of those things today, I think, hits home, and it's another opportunity, another year where the NBA has the opportunity to celebrate these things in a way that no other sport does, and in a way, for me, that the sport itself has always represented.
Wow. Both of those statements that you guys just gave also were impactful, just like that interview was. Thank you, guys.